They didn't want our resources. They didn't want our territory. When the Kalan hegemony glassed New Galveston, murdering 3 million men, women, and children, they simply wanted to send a message. But humanity doesn't just read messages. We return them with absolute, blinding extinction. The silence of deep space was something Captain Jonathan Hayes had spent 20 years getting used to. But the silence broadcasting from the New Galveston colony was different. It wasn't the quiet of the void, it was the suffocating, heavy silence of a graveyard. The UNN cruiser Vanguard dropped out of its Alcubierre warp bubble at the edge of the Epsilon Indy system. The navigational monitors flickered to life, painting the bridge in a sterile, pale blue light. Hayes gripped the edge of the holotable, his knuckles white. The colony of New Galveston was supposed to be humanity's crowning achievement, a fully terraformed garden world, funded by Lockheed Martin Stellar and the UN Agricultural Initiative. 3 million people called it home. Now, the planet dominating the main view screen wasn't blue and green. It was a bruised, glowing ember. "Report," Hayes ordered, his voice dangerously quiet. Ensign Thomas Miller, a kid fresh out of the Annapolis Orbital Academy, swallowed hard. His hands shook over his console. "Captain, I'm reading 0 atmospheric pressure. The nitrogen-oxygen mix is gone. It's just ash and heavy carbon. Surface temperature is registering at 4,000 degrees Celsius. Life signs?" asked Lieutenant Commander Blake Ramsey, the ship's tactical officer, though everyone on the bridge already knew the answer. "None, sir," Miller whispered, tears welling in his eyes. "The terraforming engines in the northern hemisphere are vaporized. The residential domes, they're just craters. The crust is fractured down to the mantle." Hayes felt a cold spike of adrenaline pierce his chest. His sister Emily was a lead botanist on New Galveston. She had sent him a comburst just 3 weeks ago, showing off her newly cultivated hybrid wheat fields, laughing as her young son chased a synthesized butterfly through the crops. Now, she was part of the radioactive dust, choking the planet's upper atmosphere. "Scan for hostiles," Hayes commanded, forcing the personal agony deep down into a lightless vault in his mind. "Who did this?" "Detecting residual tachyonic radiation," Ramsey said, his fingers flying across the tactical board. "It's not a solar flare or a seismic event. This was orbital bombardment, antimatter weaponry. The energy signatures match the Kalan hegemony border patrols we encountered last year near the Orion Spur." The Kalan, an apex alien civilization that humanity had only briefly skirmished with. They were a deeply dogmatic, imperialistic race that viewed any other expanding species as a parasitic threat to their divine order. Earth Command had spent the last 14 months trying to open diplomatic channels. "Captain, we're picking up a localized transmission," Miller interrupted. "It's a repeater buoy, left in high orbit, unencrypted." "Put it on the main screen," Hayes said. The glowing, ruined husk of New Galveston was replaced by the harsh, angular face of a Kalan fleetmaster. Its skin was the color of oxidized copper, its 4 eyes burning with cold, mechanical superiority. The translation software kicked in, overlaying the alien's guttural clicks with a flat, synthesized English voice. "To the species designating itself humanity, you have expanded beyond your allotted borders. Your presence in this quadrant offends the hegemony. This world was a blight. We have sterilized it. Do not attempt to cross the Orion line again, or your core worlds will share this fate. You are vermin. Know your place and remain in the dirt." The message looped, restarting with the same cold, arrogant tone. The bridge of the Vanguard was dead silent. The crew looked to Hayes. They weren't looking for comfort. They were looking for orders. The rules of engagement dictated that Hayes should return to Earth immediately and report the unprovoked attack to the UN Security Council. He was supposed to let the politicians handle the incident. Hayes stepped up to the main display, staring into the 4 eyes of the Kalan commander. "Ramsey," Hayes said, his voice void of any emotion. "Download the telemetry from that buoy. Trace its origin trajectory. Find out exactly which star system that fleet jumped back to." "Sir," Ramsey hesitated. "Protocol dictates—" "I don't give a damn about protocol, Lieutenant," Hayes snarled, turning to face his crew. 3 million humans were just burned alive in their homes, erased from existence. We are going to find out where these bastards live, and then We are going to go home and tell Earth that peace was never an option. The UN Security Council chamber in Geneva was a masterpiece of acoustic engineering, designed to make whispers audible and shouts deafening. Today, it was filled with the frantic, terrified shouting of humanity's leaders. Admiral Evelyn Croft stood at the center of the sunken amphitheater, her hands clasped behind her back, enduring the barrage of panic. She was a veteran of the resource wars, a woman whose face was lined with the heavy toll of making impossible decisions. "This is an act of war! We must mobilize the home fleet," shouted the representative from the North American coalition. "Mobilize against what?" countered the European Union delegate. "The Kalan hegemony controls 1,000 star systems. Their dreadnoughts are the size of our moons. If we attack them, we invite the destruction of Earth itself. We must sue for peace. We must apologize for crossing the Orion line." Admiral Croft's eyes hardened. "Apologize?" she interrupted, her voice cutting through the clamor like a railgun slug. 3 million of our people are ash, Mr. Secretary. The Kalan didn't attack a military outpost. They didn't engage our fleets. They targeted unarmed farmers, children, and scientists. They left a message calling us vermin. You do not negotiate with an exterminator. Secretary General Thomas Whitmore, a career politician who had built his reputation on the fragile peace of the 2142 Geneva Accords, slammed his gavel. "Admiral Croft, your aggression is noted, but misplaced. Earth cannot win a conventional war against the hegemony. Our tactical simulations give us a 0% chance of survival if their armada reaches the Sol system." "I am aware of the simulations, Thomas," Croft said, dropping the formalities. She looked around the room, making eye contact with the defense contractors, sitting in the gallery executives from Boeing, Stellar, Raytheon Deep Space, and OCP Aerospace. "Which is why we are not going to fight a conventional war." A murmur rippled through the chamber. Croft tapped her datapad, bringing up a secure, heavily encrypted file on the central holocron. The blue glow illuminated the shocked faces of the council members. For the past decade, while this council debated trade tariffs and agricultural subsidies, naval intelligence has been preparing for the inevitable, Croft explained. "We knew that as we pushed further into the galaxy, we would eventually encounter a predator we couldn't negotiate with. We commissioned Project Ozymandias. A massive, cylindrical device appeared in the hologram. It didn't look like a ship. It looked like a brutalist, flying monolith, utterly devoid of weapons, windows, or engines, save for a massive Alcubierre warp ring." "What is that?" Whitmore asked, dread pooling in his stomach. "It's not a ship. It's a payload," Dr. William Peterson spoke up, stepping out from the shadows of the gallery. Peterson was a theoretical physicist, a man ostracized by the scientific community for his radical theories on dark matter manipulation. The Kalan military doctrine relies on their massive armadas. Tens of thousands of ships. They cluster their fleets around their core systems to project power. Their capital is Kale Prime, a system with 12 planets and a population of roughly 40 billion. Peterson adjusted his glasses, completely detached from the moral weight of what he was about to say. The Ozymandias device is a gravity shear torpedo. It utilizes concentrated dark matter to induce a runaway fusion collapse. "Collapse of what, Doctor?" Whitmore asked, his face draining of color. "A planet?" "No," Peterson said flatly. "A main sequence star." The silence in the chamber was absolute. Even the breathing of the delegates seemed to stop. "You want to blow up their sun?" whispered the EU delegate. "Technically, I want to destabilize its hydrostatic equilibrium, causing it to instantly expand into a red giant before collapsing into a supernova," Peterson corrected. "But yes, the resulting gamma-ray burst and gravitational shockwave will obliterate the entire Kale Prime system. Planets, fleets, orbital rings, everything within a 4-light-year radius will be vaporized." "My God," Whitmore breathed. "Admiral Croft, this is genocide. This is madness. If we do this, we are worse than they are. We become the monsters." Croft stepped closer to the podium, her gaze unwavering. "They killed 3 million of our people just to swat a fly. If we do not show them and the rest of the galaxy the absolute terrifying consequences of spilling human blood, Earth will be next. I will not let our homeworld burn because you lack the stomach for survival." "I forbid it," Whitmore stammered. "The Council forbids this. I will order the UNN to stand down." "The UNN answers to the Council," Croft said smoothly. But the Black Fleet answers only to me. Before Whitmore could call the guards, the heavy doors of the chamber opened. Captain Jonathan Hayes walked in, dressed in the pitch-black fatigues of a deep-cover operative. Behind him stood a dozen heavily armed Marines, their weapons lowered but ready. "Captain Hayes," Croft said, "is your ship prepared?" "The Vanguard has been retrofitted, Admiral," Hayes replied, his voice a hollow echo of the man he was before New Galveston. "The Ozymandias payload is secured in our cargo bay. The crew is entirely made up of volunteers, mostly people who lost family on the colony. We are ready." "You are committing treason!" Whitmore screamed. "I'm saving your life, Secretary General," Hayes said quietly, turning to look at the politician. "You can put me in front of a firing squad when I get back, assuming I come back at all." The Alcubierre drive didn't push a ship through space. It folded space around the ship, moving the universe while the vessel remained stationary. It was supposed to be a smooth, imperceptible transition. But the Vanguard was hauling a weapon so dense, so fundamentally unnatural, that the warp bubble shuddered and screamed for the entire 5-day journey to the Sirius B quadrant. Captain Hayes stood on the bridge, staring into the swirling vortex of folded space. The crew was silent. There was no casual banter, no coffee breaks. Every man and woman on board was locked into a state of hyper-focused grief. They were ghosts, carrying a bomb into the underworld, dropping out of warp in 30 seconds, Lieutenant Ramsey announced, his hands gripping his console. "Initiating stealth bafflers. We are running dark. Auxiliary power only. Stand by to deploy the Ozymandias," Hayes ordered. "Miller, prep the firing sequence." "Aye, Captain," Miller said, his voice surprisingly steady. The ship shuddered violently, and the swirling vortex vanished, replaced by the staggering, overwhelming sight of the Cal Prime system. The main view screen had to instantly dim its filters by 90% to prevent the bridge crew from being blinded. Before them was the Kalen Homestar, a massive, furious blue supergiant. But it was the space around the star that made Hayes's blood run cold. Tens of thousands of Kalen warships orbited the inner planets. Massive dreadnoughts, orbital defense platforms, and shipyard rings that spanned thousands of miles. The space traffic was so dense it looked like a swarm of metallic locusts blocking out the light of the sun. Billions of lives were down there, on those worlds. For a fraction of a second, the sheer weight of what he was about to do pressed down on Hayes's chest. He was about to murder a solar system. He was about to become the greatest mass murderer in the history of the universe. He thought of his sister. He thought of his nephew's ashes floating in the dead atmosphere of New Galveston. The Kalen hadn't hesitated. They hadn't felt remorse. Hayes' face hardened into a mask of stone. "Captain, we've been painted!" Ramsey yelled, his console lighting up with red threat indicators. "Their outer picket ships have detected our warp wake. We're being targeted by roughly 400 dreadnoughts. They're hailing us." "Ignore the hail," Hayes said. "Helm, set coordinates." "Sir? They're moving to intercept." "I don't care about their fleet," Hayes barked. "Helm, plot a microjump inside the gravity well." The bridge crew froze. A microjump inside a system was dangerous. A microjump into a star's gravity well was considered suicide. The gravitational shear would likely rip the ship to atoms before they even materialized. "Coordinates locked," the helmsman said, swallowing hard, targeting the upper corona of the blue supergiant. "Do it," Hayes commanded. The Vanguard lurched. The Kalen fleet fired a massive volley of plasma torpedoes, but the human cruiser vanished a split second before the ordnance struck. They reappeared in hell. The view screen was entirely white. The ship's temperature alarms began screaming instantly. The Vanguard had jumped to within 100,000 miles of the star's surface. The magnetic fields of the blue supergiant were tearing at the ship's hull, buckling the titanium plating. "Hull integrity at 60% and dropping," Miller yelled over the blaring sirens. "Heat shielding is failing." "Launch the payload," Hayes roared. In the cargo bay, explosive bolts blew the outer doors into the inferno. The Ozymandias device, a pitch-black cylinder of compressed dark matter, was ejected directly into the furious, boiling plasma of the star. "Payload is away. It's caught in the star's gravity pool. It's sinking into the photosphere," Ramsey reported. "Get us out of here. Maximum warp, blind jump. Now." The Vanguard's engines screamed as they fought against the immense gravity of the supergiant. The ship groaned, metal warping and snapping, bulkheads sealing as sections of the vessel boiled away. Just as the structural integrity field hit zero, the warp drive engaged, violently tearing the ship out of real space and throwing it back into the void. Back in the Kale Prime system, the Kalan Armada paused. Their sensors detected the human ship vanishing. The fleet master on the flagship scoffed, assuming the humans had panicked and fled after realizing the futility of their attack. They hadn't even fired a shot at the planets. Then, the alarms on the Kalan ships began to scream. Down in the core of the blue supergiant, the Ozymandias device detonated. It wasn't a fiery explosion, it was a tear in the fabric of physics. The dark matter ripped the core's fusion process apart, instantly halting the outward pressure that kept the star from collapsing under its own gravity. For a terrifying, impossible second, the massive blue star simply turned black. And then, it rebounded. The star swelled, mutating from blue to a sickly, violent red, expanding outward at millions of miles an hour. The innermost planet of the Kalan hegemony was swallowed instantly, vaporized before its inhabitants even knew they were dead. The Kalan Armada tried to engage their warp drives, but the gravitational shockwave hit them first, crushing dreadnoughts like tin cans. The star detonated into a supernova, releasing more energy in a single second than the sun would produce in its entire lifetime. A blinding, apocalyptic wall of white light washed over the 12 planets, erasing 30 billion Kalan from the cosmos. In the span of 3 minutes, the heart of the Kalan hegemony ceased to exist. The UNN cruiser Vanguard did not fly back into the Sol system. It bled into it. When the bruised and battered vessel finally tore its way out of the Alcubierre warp bubble just past the orbit of Neptune, it barely resembled a ship of the line. The pristine, silver-white titanium carbon hull, forged by the Northrop Grumman Space Systems shipyards in low Earth orbit, was completely scorched, stripped down to its skeletal superstructure by the immense gravitational shear of the Kale Prime supernova. The port engine nacelle was entirely missing, sheared off during their desperate blind jump away from the collapsing blue supergiant. Emergency bulkheads were clamped tight across a dozen different hull breaches, and the ship was venting a trailing cloud of crystallized oxygen and leaking plasma fluid that looked like glowing, fluorescent blood against the backdrop of the void. On the bridge, the smell of ozone, burnt wiring, and sweat hung heavy in the recycled, freezing air. Life support was failing. The temperature had dropped to a bitter 3 degrees Celsius. Captain Jonathan Hayes sat heavily in the command chair, a localized thermal blanket wrapped tightly around his shoulders. His face was pale, his eyes hollow and bloodshot. He had not slept in the 5 days it took to limp back from the Sirius B quadrant. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the blinding, impossible white light of a star tearing itself apart. He felt the phantom screams of 30 billion alien souls, burning away into cosmic dust. Captain, Lieutenant Commander Blake Ramsey rasped, his voice rough from inhaling chemical smoke during the jump. He was leaning heavily on his tactical console, a hastily bandaged burn covering the left side of his neck. Palantir, Astroanalytics, Deep Space buoys are painting us. Earth Command is hailing its Secretary General Whitmore. He's bypassing standard traffic control. Hayes stared at the cracked, flickering main view screen. "Put him through, Blake." The image of Secretary General Thomas Whitmore appeared, distorted by static and the Vanguard's failing comms array. The politician was not in his usual impeccably tailored Geneva suit. He looked disheveled, terrified, and furious. Behind him, the frantic, chaotic movement of the UN Emergency Command bunker in the Cheyenne Mountain complex was visible. "Captain Hayes," Whitmore's voice shook with a cocktail of rage and sheer panic. "You are hereby ordered to power down your remaining engines and surrender your vessel. You will be boarded by UN peacekeeping forces under the authority of the General Assembly. You and your entire surviving crew are under arrest for high treason, insubordination, and crimes against humanity, or whatever the galactic equivalent is. You have doomed us all." Hayes didn't flinch. He didn't even raise his voice. "Secretary General, my ship is functioning on secondary battery reserves. My crew requires immediate medical evacuation. We have wounded who will not survive another cycle without advanced trauma care." "You lost the right to make demands when you murdered an entire solar system, Jonathan," Whitmore screamed, dropping all diplomatic pretense. The Palantir sensory nets detected the gamma-ray burst an hour ago. The gravitational shockwave from the KL Prime supernova disrupted the subspace communication grid across 3 sectors. You didn't just kill their capital. You shattered the entire local galactic arms hyperspace lanes. The diplomatic fallout, the Kalen glassed New Galveston. Whitmore, Hayes interrupted, his voice dropping an octave, cold and absolute. 3 million human beings. Burned to ash. I eliminated the threat. The hegemony's command structure is gone. Their primary shipyards are gone. Their home fleet is gone. You're welcome. You fool, Whitmore breathed, leaning closer to the camera, his eyes wide with a terror that made Hayes' stomach suddenly twist. You absolute, arrogant fool. Did you honestly think an empire that has ruled 1,000 systems for 10 millennia kept all their eggs in one basket? Hayes frowned, sitting forward. Explain. Whitmore wiped sweat from his brow. Admiral Croft's intelligence was flawed. Project Ozymandias was a mistake. We didn't cut off the head of the snake, Hayes. We just kicked the hornet's nest. A deep-cover SpaceX Lockheed probe sitting in the Cygnus sector just transmitted a subspace burst before it went dark. The Kalen didn't just have a home fleet. They had a retribution armada, a decentralized, automated, fail-safe fleet stationed in deep space nebulas, commanded by a splinter faction of their military. Ramsey's hands flew over his console, desperately trying to route power to the long-range sensors. Captain, I'm linking our telemetry with the Cheyenne Mountain feed. The view screen split. On one side, Whitmore's terrified face. On the other, a tactical map of the Sol system's outer perimeter. Red dots began to populate the screen. First 10, then 50, then 100. They detected the destruction of their sun, Whitmore whispered, his voice cracking. The Kalen warlords enacted a dead man's protocol. They aren't interested in subjugating us anymore. They aren't interested in messaging us. They are coming to crack Earth into pieces. How many? Hayes asked, the blood draining from his face. 300 super dreadnoughts, Ramsey answered, staring in horror at the tactical feed. Captain, they just dropped out of warp at the edge of the Oort cloud. They are burning directly for Earth. They'll be in high orbit in less than 4 hours. The UN home fleet is moving to intercept, but we are outnumbered 10-1. Surrender your ship, Hayes, Whitmore demanded. I am broadcasting an unconditional surrender to the Kalen fleet. We are offering you and Admiral Croft to them as the sole architects of the KL Prime atrocity. It is the only way to save Earth. Hayes looked at his crew. Ensign Miller, nursing a broken arm, looked back at him, terrified but resolute. These men and women had sacrificed their souls to avenge New Galveston, and now the politicians were offering them up as sacrificial lambs to appease an enemy that wanted nothing less than human extinction. They won't accept your surrender, Thomas, Hayes said quietly. You can't negotiate with a machine programmed for vengeance. I have to try, Whitmore shouted. Boarding shuttles are inbound to your position. Do not resist. The transmission cut out. The bridge was cloaked in a heavy, suffocating silence. The Vanguard was crippled. They had no weapons, no warp drive, and barely enough life support to keep from freezing to death. Captain? Miller asked, his voice trembling slightly. What are your orders? Hayes slowly stood up, letting the thermal blanket fall to the deck. The exhaustion in his bones was suddenly replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. The politicians wanted to grovel. They wanted to beg a technologically superior alien race for a mercy that did not exist. Humanity was about to be eradicated, and the leaders of Earth were busy drafting apology letters. Blake, Hayes turned to his tactical officer, what is the status of the experimental dark matter containment drive? The prototype engine we used to haul the Ozymandias payload? Ramsey looked confused. The secondary drive? It's completely fried, sir. The magnetic containment field is barely holding. It's leaking exotic radiation into the lower engineering decks. Why? Can you bypass the safety regulators? Hayes asked, walking toward the primary engineering console. Can you intentionally collapse the magnetic containment field on my mark? Ramsey's eyes widened as he realized what his captain was suggesting. Sir, if I collapse the containment field on the dark matter drive, the resulting implosion won't just destroy the Vanguard. It will create a localized, microscopic black hole. The gravitational shear would be a fraction of the Ozymandias bomb. but it would violently pull in anything within a 5,000-mile radius before instantly collapsing in on itself via Hawking radiation. It's a suicide bomb, a gravity bomb. Can you do it? Hayes repeated, his voice leaving no room for argument. Yes, Ramsay swallowed hard. But we have no engines. We can't move to intercept the Kalan fleet. We are dead in the water near Neptune. They are heading for Earth. Then we make them come to us, Hayes said grimly. He turned to the communications station. Ensign Miller, open a wide-band, unencrypted subspace channel. Broadcast it across every frequency the Kalan hegemony uses. And patch it through to the UN Emergency Command. Miller nodded, his hands flying over the console. Channel open, Captain. You are broadcasting to the entire Sol system. Hayes stepped up to the camera. He didn't look like a defeated man. He looked like the Grim Reaper incarnate. To the commander of the Kalan Retribution Armada. This is Captain Jonathan Hayes of the UNN Vanguard. I am the man who dropped the Ozymandias payload into your sun. I am the man who erased your homeworld from the cosmos. In the Cheyenne Mountain bunker, Whitmore stared at the screen in absolute horror, screaming at his technicians to cut the feed, but the Blackfleet encryption codes locked them out. I am sitting dead in the water near the 8th planet of this system, Hayes continued, his voice echoing across the void of space. My ship is crippled. I am unarmed. The leaders of Earth want to offer me to you in exchange for peace. But I know you don't want peace. You want me. Hayes leaned closer to the lens. Come and get me. The Kalan hegemony did not operate on human logic, but they understood vengeance perfectly. The algorithmic hatred embedded in the Retribution Armada's command structure processed Hayes' transmission. The human who had murdered their gods, who had extinguished their light, was sitting completely defenseless on the edge of the system. It was an insult they could not ignore. The massive Kalan fleet, tearing through the void toward Earth, suddenly shifted its trajectory. 300 colossal, angular super-dreadnoughts, glowing with hostile plasma energy, pivoted away from the inner planets and burned hard toward the orbit of Neptune. They took the bait, Captain, Ramsay reported, staring at the tactical display. The red swarm was descending upon them like a tidal wave of metallic fury. They are entirely breaking formation. The UN home fleet is holding near Mars, completely untouched. The Kalan are converging on our exact coordinates. ETA, 12 minutes. Hayes looked around his ruined bridge. The crew, 28 surviving men and women, were staring back at him. They were battered, bleeding, and exhausted, but none of them showed an ounce of regret. They had volunteered for this. They had known from the moment they left Earth that this was a one-way trip. Listen to me, Hayes said, his voice carrying clearly through the freezing air of the bridge. In 10 minutes, 300 alien warships are going to drop out of warp directly on top of us. They want to vaporize the ship to satisfy their honor. But we are going to give them a very different kind of death. He walked down the center aisle, making eye contact with his crew. The politicians back on Earth think survival is about compromise. They think if you bend the knee low enough, the executioner will spare your neck. But we know the truth. The universe does not respect the weak. The Kalan destroyed New Galveston because they thought we were weak. Today, right here, we prove that humanity will not be bullied, will not be subjugated, and will not be exterminated. We die today so that Earth lives tomorrow. Captain, Miller interrupted, his voice tight. The UN peacekeeping boarding shuttles. They are still approaching. They are 2 minutes out. They're going to get caught in the crossfire. Hayes cursed under his breath. Whitmore's stubborn, bureaucratic idiocy was going to get his own people killed. Hail the lead shuttle. Open a channel. Channel open, Miller said. UN Shuttle Commander, this is Captain Hayes, he barked. Abort your approach immediately. A hostile alien armada is dropping into this sector in less than 8 minutes. Turn around and burn for Earth, or you will be caught in a localized gravitational collapse. Negative, Vanguard, came the crisp, robotic voice of a UN Marine commander. We have strict orders from Secretary General Whitmore to secure your vessel and place you under arrest. Power down your airlocks and prepare to be boarded. You don't understand, you absolute morons, Hayes yelled, slamming his fist on the console. We are rigging this ship to implode. If you dock with us, you die. Compliance is mandatory, Captain. We are engaging docking clamps. Through the viewport, Hayes could see the sleek, silver UN shuttles approaching the Vanguard's ruined hull. They were blind to the tactical feeds, blinded by the rigid chain of command. Blake, Hayes turned to Ramsey, if they dock, their mass gets added to the ship's profile. Will it disrupt the dark matter implosion? Ramsey ran the calculations frantically. Yes, the gravitational shear calculations are precise to the microgram. If those shuttles attach to our hull, the implosion field will be asymmetrical. It might not generate a localized black hole. It might just be a conventional explosion. It won't be enough to take out the Kalan fleet. Hayes closed his eyes. The weight of command was a crushing, physical thing. To save Earth, he had to destroy the Kalan. To destroy the Kalan, he had to detonate the drive. To detonate the drive correctly, he had to repel his own people. Miller. Man the portside point defense cannons, Hayes ordered, his voice hollow. The bridge crew froze. Captain? Miller whispered, staring at him in horror. Sir, those are human beings. Those are UN Marines. If they dock, we fail, Hayes said, opening his eyes. They were cold, dead pools of resolve. If we fail, Earth burns. 300 dreadnoughts will glass the planet within the hour. 14 billion people will die. Fire the cannons, Ensign. Miller's hands hovered over the weapons console, shaking violently. He couldn't do it. He couldn't fire on his own people. Hayes stepped forward, gently moving the young ensign aside. I'll do it. Hayes took the targeting controls. The UN shuttles were 50 meters away, their docking rings extending. Hayes lined up the reticle on the lead shuttle's primary engine block. He didn't want to vaporize them. He just needed to disable them, push them away. He pulled the firing trigger. The Vanguard's automated twin tungsten defense cannons roared to life. A stream of hypersonic kinetic rounds slammed into the lead shuttle. The sheer force of the impact shredded the shuttle's engine nacelle, sending the craft spinning wildly off course. It didn't explode, but it was crippled, drifting helplessly into the void. The second shuttle immediately broke off its approach, banking hard to port to avoid the debris, its pilot realizing too late that the Vanguard was not bluffing. Vanguard, what the hell are you doing? The Marine commander screamed over the radio. You just fired on UN personnel! We have casualties! Get out of the blast radius, Commander, Hayes replied softly. That is my final warning. Suddenly, the proximity alarms on the bridge began to scream with a deafening, piercing intensity. The tactical holomap turned entirely red. Captain, Ramsey yelled. Space-time is folding! They're here! The black void of space outside the viewports suddenly violently tore open. It didn't look like a standard warp jump. It was a brutal, jagged tear in reality. Out of the tears poured the Kalan Retribution Armada. They were monstrous. Colossal wedges of pitch-black metal, bristling with glowing purple plasma lances and antimatter torpedo tubes. 300 of them, surrounding the crippled UN cruiser in a perfect, suffocating sphere. The sheer mass of the fleet blotted out the distant stars, casting the Vanguard in a deep, terrifying shadow. The flagship of the Armada, a vessel the size of a small moon, drifted slowly to the front of the formation. A transmission forced its way into the Vanguard's main computer, overriding all systems. The synthesized, mechanical voice of a Kalan warlord echoed through the bridge. Human, you have summoned us. You have seen your death approaching, and you have chosen to die rather than hide. For a species of dirt-dwelling parasites, you possess a curious anomaly, defiance. But defiance does not alter mathematics. You are one. We are Legion. Your world will burn in the fire you ignited. Hayes stood straight, looking up at the massive, glowing hull of the alien dreadnought filling his view screen. He felt no fear, only a profound, absolute calm. He had brought the executioners right to the trap. Ramsey, Hayes said softly. Ready, Captain? Ramsey replied, his hand resting on the manual override lever for the dark matter magnetic containment field. It's been an honor serving with you all, Hayes said, looking around the bridge one last time. See you on the other side. He turned back to the view screen. He tapped the comms open to the Kalan flagship. You're right about the mathematics, Hayes told the alien warlord. We are one. You are Legion. But you forgot the most fundamental rule of human mathematics. Hayes smiled, a grim, terrifying expression. Anything multiplied by 0 is 0. Hayes looked at Ramsay and nodded. Containment field dropping. Now, Ramsay said, pulling the lever down with a violent jerk. Deep in the bowels of the Vanguard, the magnetic stabilizers holding the volatile mass of dark matter instantly snapped. The exotic particles, suddenly freed from their electromagnetic prison, violently slammed into the ship's conventional fusion reactor. The reaction was instantaneous. There was no explosion. There was no fire. Instead, a sphere of absolute perfect darkness erupted from the center of the Vanguard. It expanded outward at the speed of light, silent and terrifying. It wasn't a shockwave. It was a localized collapse of physics. A microscopic black hole had been born, screaming into existence, starving for mass. The Vanguard was vaporized instantly, its atoms crushed into a singularity in a fraction of a nanosecond. Hayes, Ramsay, Miller, and the rest of the crew felt absolutely nothing as they were erased from existence. The gravitational pull of the singularity caught the Kalan Armada entirely by surprise. The sphere of crushing, inescapable gravity snapped outward, grabbing the 300 super dreadnoughts in an unbreakable grip. The Kalan ships tried to engage their thrusters, their massive engines burning with the power of dying suns, but they were trying to outrun a black hole from point-blank range. The massive titanium hulls of the dreadnoughts began to groan, then buckle, then shatter. Like water swirling down a drain, the entire alien armada was dragged violently inward. The flagship, the vessel the size of a moon, was stretched and spaghettified, its impenetrable armor peeling away like wet paper as it was sucked into the void. For 10 glorious, terrifying seconds, the microscopic black hole feasted, consuming the entire Kalan Retribution armada, ripping their ships and their bodies down to the subatomic level. And then, unable to sustain its own mass without a continuous feed of matter, the black hole violently collapsed in on itself. It vanished with a brilliant, blinding flash of Hawking radiation, a silent pulse of blue light that rippled outward across the Sol system, washing over the disabled UN shuttles past the orbit of Mars, and finally illuminating the night sky of Earth like a second moon. Then, there was nothing. The space where the Vanguard and 300 invincible alien dreadnoughts had been was completely, utterly empty. The void had returned to its silent perfection. In the Cheyenne Mountain bunker, absolute silence reigned. Secretary General Whitmore stared at the blank tactical feed, his mouth slightly open, the color completely drained from his face. The red dots were gone. The threat was erased. Earth was saved. Not by diplomacy, not by the politicians who sought to surrender, but by a disgraced captain and a crew of 28 ghosts who refused to bow. Admiral Evelyn Croft stood in the back of the command center, her arms crossed over her chest. She looked at the blank screen, a single tear slipping down her cheek, mourning the man she had sent to die. Humanity had stepped out into a hostile, unforgiving galaxy. They had encountered an apex predator that sought to swat them out of existence. But the galaxy had just learned a terrifying, fundamental truth about the children of Earth. If you push humanity into the dark, they won't just learn to see in the shadows. They will become the monsters that hide there. The Kalan hegemony was dead. Earth endured, and the stars, for the first time in 10,000 years, looked toward the Sol system, not with contempt, but with absolute, paralyzing fear. They poked the bear, and Earth responded by burning down the entire forest. Humanity proved that when you take our homes, we don't just fight back, we rewrite the map of the galaxy. What did you think of Captain Hayes' devastating revenge? Was Earth justified, or did they go too far? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to smash that like button, share this story with your sci-fi loving friends, and subscribe for more epic HFY content.
Hi, my name is Tran Trung, the owner and manager of Palace Truths. After watching the video, Aliens Destroyed a Human Colony, Earth Responded by Deleting Their Entire Solar System _HFY, I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? What stayed with me most was the mix of grief, anger, and determination running through the entire story. Humanity didn't respond out of pride alone. It felt more like a warning about what can happen when people underestimate how deeply humans protect their own. That balance between loss and retaliation gave the story a really heavy atmosphere. I also think the story quietly raises questions about power and consequences. Just because someone can strike first doesn't mean they understand what kind of response they might awaken. In real life, I think it's a reminder not to dismiss people or assume weakness based on appearances alone. Do you think Earth's response went too far, or was it justified after what happened? And which moment in the story hit you the hardest? Thanks for spending time with Palace Truths. If this story meant something to you, feel free to leave a comment and maybe like or subscribe for more HFY stories like this.